I think it was Lama Yeshe kind of coined that. He said, be your own, we have to learn to be our own psychologist. And I suppose that's exactly what Buddha's saying. You know, I suppose, I don't know when so-called psychology started. First of all, it's just about the mind, but like I always joke, we always like to give these fancy Greek words. It sounds more important, doesn't it? Than mindist. Instead of being a mindist, we have a psychologist, isn't it? And so in the beginning, I suppose, was it Mr. Freud? I don't know, was it Mr. Freud who started the whole idea of, in our culture, psychotherapy and things? When did psychiatry come into our culture? I wonder. Anyway, it certainly was something that you had to be an expert in, and you went to a doctor, usually a white male, wasn't it, a white gentleman, who was expert about the brain, and then he diagnosed you and you gave you a pill or something. But the Buddha's, you know, I'm sure the Buddha had doctors as well. I mean, there were good doctors around in India, no doubt. This is exactly the point. This is the exact approach in Buddhism. Someone can advise you, there's no question. Someone can advise you. Buddha advises us, but you do the work, you know. You must do the work. And that means you have to become the expert. I mean, it's clear, if you can have someone else do your garden for you and be an expert botanist, but you know, if you want to do it yourself, you have to learn it. You can't pretend. So if you've studied Buddhism a little bit, and then you hear about the level of the depth and the breadth and the complexity and the sophistication of the literature on the mind since the Hindus, since 3,000 years ago, I mean, it's very clear. It's if that's what you need to learn, you've got to be a pretty sophisticated person, you know, to do the job that Buddha is saying that we can do in the mind, with our mind. So you need to be an expert to do it. There's no question. So what is it? What is the job to do? You know, the job is to transform our mind from limited, neurotic, fearful, suffering, you know, distressed, harmful, to clear, wise, empathetic. I mean, and like the bonus is blissful, happy, blissful, you know. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Blissful. Who has that, you know? But if you look at this technique these Indians invented, again, more than 3,000 years ago, I always quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago. They were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self, not Mr. Freud, as we might think, you know. And how they investigated the self wasn't but with a microscope on a thing called a brain. It was with their own mind. And I think it's interesting in our culture. I think I always like to say that in the sciences, that psychology is the lowest on the totem pole, I think, because it's subjective and we don't like subjective. We don't trust it, you know. But it's literally the opposite for the Buddha, literally the opposite. The mind is the most powerful thing. The mind is the one thing you can trust, you know. So of course you've got to train it properly. So this concentration technique, these genius Indians invented, this capacity for accomplishing samadhi, this extremely subtle level of cognition, of mind, beyond the grosser level of conceptuality, beyond the sensory altogether, a level of mind we don't even posit as existing in neuroscience. I mean, that's astonishing, you know. Lama Yeshe in his book on Mahamudra just gives a few small examples of what your mind would be like having accomplished just simply single point of concentration. Forget having achieved nirvana, forget having realized emptiness, or forget Buddhahood. It's completely mind-boggling, you know. But of course, as soon as we hear this in our culture, as soon as we hear it's related to something called meditation, we put it in the religious kind of mystical, you know, label, and therefore don't take it seriously. Don't think it's serious. Don't think it's rigorous and you know, serious. That's very strong in our culture, I think. But there's just no question the level of clarity and precision and rigor and discipline that we know you need to apply just to be a good cook. You know, forget something more sophisticated like being a musician or a scientist. is exactly what the Buddha demands, what is demanded in order to accomplish what he is saying we can all accomplish with our mind. So maybe you could argue most of us won't go into it that deeply. 99% of us won't go to the mountains, and get single point of concentration. But still there's an awful lot we can do, And also what's interesting about psychology in Buddhism, it's totally, totally inextricably linked with ethics. And I think I've got a feeling in our culture, we don't think of psychology as have anything to do with ethics. That sounds like judgment. But in the Buddhist view, you can't possibly separate it from ethics. It's utterly integrated. Because from the Buddhist perspective, when we look at the way he analyzes the contents of our mind into simply speaking, the neurotic, I-based, ego-based, fearful, neurotic, distressing states of mind, and this is not judgmental, this is experiential, called, the root delusion that posits a separate I, that plus attachment to get what the I wants, the anger and panic attack when we don't get what it wants, and all the other dramas, the unhappy states of mind, the things that we would call definitely mental suffering. From the Buddha's perspective, they are totally rooted in the opposite of ethics, because they're I-driven, neurotic I-driven, and panic-stricken. Basically, they're rooted in fear. Fear is their main flavor, because that I is having a panic attack, not getting what it wants or trying to get what it wants, worrying about what it won't get and what it will get or whatever, over-exaggerating, under-exaggerating. I mean, they're really distressing states of mind. They're totally the cause of suffering, and they cause us to do harmful things. So they're opposite to ethics. They're the opposite to ethics. Because of incredible attachment, we might end up lying. Because of incredible attachment, we might end up, raping. Because of incredible attachment, we might steal. So they are what drives us to do unethical things. They're what drive us to do things that harm others. So the very first level of practice in Buddhism, the very first entry level into Buddhism, isn't to know your mind yet, isn't even really meditation. It's good ethics. If you're familiar with the Tibetan Buddhist packaging of the teachings, and certainly the Gelugpa, the tradition that I'm involved in, I'm trained in, Tsongkhapa's presentation of the teachings, entry-level grade 1 junior school, has nothing to do with the mind yet. It's to do with behavior. Behave nicely. Don't harm others. It's completely ethics. It starts with that, and that underpins your practice all the way to Buddhahood. You can't possibly do the job that Buddha is describing without bringing in ethics, And that, I think, again, in our psychology, we find that surprising. Because we think it's judgmental somehow. Or sort of religious a bit, So understanding this really Buddha's view will make sense to us, Because you've got this first set of states of mind, the first lot, there's neurotic ones, unhappy ones, distressing ones. They refer to them as afflictions, mental afflictions. We all know them. We're very familiar. Attachment, anger, low self-esteem, anxiety, jealousy, depression. They mightn't always use exactly those words in the Buddhist presentation of the mind, but we can recognize them, And they've all got the same characteristic. They're all the voices, if you like, of this root view, the root problem, the Buddha says, such that when that's uprooted, that's when you've achieved liberation from suffering and its causes. They're all rooted in this primordial, deeply instinctive, beyond intellectual, deeply primordial, deeply habitual, eons old, utter belief, totally instinctive belief in a real, solid, independent, separate, pointable, findable me. So the first level, given that being your own therapist is from the perspective of this lam rim, that's the second level of practice. The very first one is, don't worry about your mind yet, just control the servants of your mind. And what's that? Your body and your speech. We don't articulate it like that too much in our culture. It's obvious we've got body that does actions, we have speech that says words, and then we have a mind that drives them. We tend to sort of think of this big lump of one kind of unified me, you know. We don't really isolate. We tend not to think, you know, we tend to think if we like a spiritual practice, we don't think of controlling our speech. It sounds boring. We certainly don't think of controlling our mind, controlling our body. We like the idea of meditation, but we can't, how can you possibly deal with what's in your mind if you can't even control the servants of your mind? If you can't even control what comes out of your mouth, how can you possibly control what drives it? In fact, because we are so unaware of our minds, and it's not part of our culture, maybe these days it is more, then we don't even notice what's in our mind until it's expressed in our body. And this is one of our major problems. You know, if you're a volatile type of person, in my life, I didn't know I was angry until it came out my mouth. There was not much, and there's not much space between feeling it and coming out, you know. And maybe you don't express your anger with words, but you'll discover that you've got some problem, that you're totally depressed and because you can't get out of bed one morning because you are inert. So we really, because we're so dominant, we're so dominated by our bodies, we make the body the boss, Lama Yeshe says. We don't even notice what we call our feelings until our body indicates them. In fact, we make the body more powerful. These feelings we have in the body, you know, they're very real feelings, physically felt, but they're the grossest level. But at least first, if we can harness the energy of the behavior, harness the energy of the body and the speech. And this is where the classic ethics comes in. The very first kind of recommendations of practice that Buddha recommends, Buddha suggests, you know, not even as a commitment or just his suggestion, first level of practice, control your body and control your speech. Don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner, don't lie, don't badmouth others, you know, 3 of the body and 4 of the speech. So that's where I think it's extremely important for us to understand what's behind this suggestion, this advice. And I think because we are coming mostly, let's say, from creator-based spiritual paths, like either Judaism or Christianity, this is why we hear it as religious. Because that's what Jesus says, you know, don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner. Don't, same thing, he's got his little list of, and Buddha's got his list of 10 don'ts, and so has Jesus, you know. So we hear it like that. But I think this is why it's so important, if we want to understand where Buddha's coming from, to really start to be our own therapist and work on our mind and do what he says we can do to radically reconfigure it into the mind of a happy, joyful person, you know. Got to start with the first steps. But we have to understand why he would suggest we don't kill and steal and lie. Because it sounds exactly the same as Jesus. And you ask, and this is a crucial point, we should look at it like this. We should, if we want to understand Buddhism, we should ask the question. We should say to Buddha, well, excuse me, mate, why should I not kill? Why are you telling me this, you know? We should ask. We tend to think, oh, well, it sounds like a good idea. It's not nice to kill people, but we should have a logical reason. And this is where the radical difference between the Christian and the creator-based philosophies and the Buddhist one. And this is not meant to be criticism, it's just meant to be seeing the distinction. And then when we can listen to Buddha, if we like Buddha and we want to take his advice, we have his logical reasons why he's giving the advice. And it makes a big difference. It's huge. The difference is huge. It's radically different. So I asked my Jesuit priest friend, what is a sin? By definition, why, in other words, by definition, why does Jesus say don't kill? What's the reason behind it? What makes it a wrong action? Why is it called a sin? And his answer was so clear. He said, it's doing what God said not to do. And that's how we think of ethics. Somebody else sitting on top of us, squashing us and saying, don't do that. You're a naughty person. And if you do, you'll get punished. That's how we think automatically. And that's exactly the point in Christianity, not criticizing. Christianity posits this energy called God, who is all-knowing and all-seeing and all-compassionate, and who runs the show, who created me, created the rules, and of course needs to be obeyed. It goes without saying. I'm not criticizing. And that's how we tend to think of morality. Your mother says do this, God says do it, judge says do this, the police say it. It's completely embedded in our mind when we hear don't do that. And that's what a sin is. He said there's some level of natural law in the instruction, don't kill, meaning people don't like getting killed. But he says the main thing that causes the action of killing and stealing and lying to be a sin, to be wrong, morally wrong, is because God said. I'm not criticizing. That's pretty intense. Now you ask Buddha, why is killing wrong? Because he says the same thing, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. And he will say, well, guess what, Robina? Have you noticed people don't like being harmed? So for Buddha, it is a natural law. Nothing to do with the fact that he says it. That for the Buddha would be a bit like you go to your doctor and she says, don't smoke. And you'll say, why not? Which is a reasonable question. And she does not say, because I say so. And if you smoke, I will give you cancer. That's how we think of morality. And that maybe is kind of like a neurotic way of putting the Christian teachings, because if you are in love with God, you want to do God's wishes, no problem. But that is what's behind it, because God's the boss. There's no question. So that's how we hear it. And even what's interesting, that for the Buddha that is coming from that's coming from the Buddha's perspective, from a philosophical position that he disagrees with. That's one of the points at which he diverged from the Hindus. They're positing of an essential energy that's the source of the universe. That's a dualistic view for the Buddha. That's a mistake. He's not being critical, but he says that's not viable. And so we have that as a philosophical position in our mind. And it's exactly the same one as when we hear that your mother says don't do this, and the judge says don't do this, and the police say don't do this, and somebody else says don't do this. We have that same dualistic view, someone else telling me what to do. Nothing to do with that for the Buddha. This is a huge difference. So we like Buddha, we better know this, because the instruction sounds like the same. So there's two things here. This is forget being your own therapist yet. This is the basis. This is a starting point. This is the preparation for becoming being your own therapist, really getting deeply into the mind itself. You control the servants first. So, for the Buddha, there's two things here, very, very clear. The reason it harms others, right? It harms others. But then you have to ask, when you have to say, well, so then we assume, okay, so he says this negative action of killing is wrong because it harms others. So when we hear he says, well, then don't kill, we will just assume without question it's because it harms others. But no, not yet. That's too advanced. That's compassion. That's compassion. The reason very first, most of us in our culture, we can't hear this properly. We can't hear this properly, but this is the whole point. The reason first Buddha exhorts us not to kill, steal, lie is because they are actions that harm others. They harm others, there's no question. But because his view of karma, this is where this comes in first. This is fundamental to Buddhism. The view of karma is such that every millisecond of what I think and do and say programs me. We find this very hard in our culture to hear this properly. That's what's behind his instruction, don't kill. Because guess what, Robina? It's going to harm you, sweetie pie. just exactly like your doctor. Don't smoke, Robina, sweetheart, because it'll harm you. But we can't hear that properly. What do you mean, my killing you? What do you mean, my killing and stealing and lying harms me? We're a bit sort of schizophrenic. We can't quite get it. Because we tend not to think that what goes on in our mind and what we do plays a role in who we become. We tend to defend our right to do something. We don't think it has much of an impact. But the Buddha is saying everything we think and do and say, nothing goes astray. Everything we think and do and say is the process that produces the person I become. This is really the simplest way of talking about the natural law of karma. It's a natural law, Buddha says, that everything we think and do and say, so that he uses the analogy of seeds, that leaves seeds in our mind. It won't just disappear, and they will eventually ripen as future fruits. Even when it comes just to this life, forget past lives and future lives, which is what he's talking about, but let's look at this life. I think still we find it hard. You know, if everything we think and do and say has an impact upon me, is the way of putting it, has an impact upon me, affects me, brings results in me, you know, you could say like that. If everything we think and do and say brings results first to me, I don't think it's very surprising, but it is surprising to us. If you're sitting there all day at home, depressed and angry, not being critical, just it's a fact, could be, shouting and yelling and watching the news and screaming at Mr. Trump and upset about this and depressed about that and having a panic attack about this thing. What we tend to think is I am those things, but sort of it's not my fault. I can't help it. It's not my fault. It's his fault and her fault and Mr. Trump's fault and the world's fault. You know, therefore I'm allowed to be this way somehow. We can't see the simple fact that that produces me. That's having an impact upon me. We hear it as judgment. We hear it as criticism. We hear it as heavy, you know. I mean, my Catholic mother used to say, you know, virtue has its own rewards. It's sort of obvious. If you spend all day angry, apart from whoever hears you, how can we possibly think it doesn't have an impact upon me? That's quite demented. But because we're so distressed about it, and it's not fair that person did this and she did this and he did that, I'm allowed to be angry. If we hear the Buddha says, Robina, it's hurting you, what do you mean it's hurting me? I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be anxious. Look at the way my life is. I'm allowed to be depressed. We defend it mightily, so we can't hear it properly. We're so neurotic about it. We hear it as judgment. We hear it as criticism. It's hard for us to hear it. So this is the very first level. It's completely ethics personified. So what's the consequence of this in terms of being your own therapist? Well, it's obvious. If you can start to, you know, have a simple practice every day, yes, a meditation practice every day, where you even just control yourself for 5 minutes, watch your breath for 5 minutes. The first result will be that you will you'll become a little bit familiar with what's happening, so that then before you vomit out the angry words to your kid or your husband or your next door neighbor, you'll catch it, you know. So you're using your mind, but you're using your mind first to harness the body and speech, and you are the beneficiary. That's the whole point about all the first stages of practice, all the one of living in vows, becoming a monk or a nun, you know, living in vows, all of this. We are the beneficiary of this. The whole purpose of all those teachings, all those instructions, is to help us cause ourselves less suffering. That's why it's called renunciation. What are you giving up? Suffering and its causes. Who's suffering? Your own. There's no discussion of compassion here at all. That comes later. This is got compassion for yourself. We hear it as punitive and heavy and judgment, and I'm not allowed to have pleasure. I've got to control myself, you know. It's very strong inside us. Very hard to hear it properly. So important to hear it properly. We are the beneficiary of that. Of course, as Lama Zopa says, also the rats and roaches will have a party. Could you leave them in peace? That's not the purpose that drives this initial stages of practice. The goal, the reason behind this first stage of practice is because I am sick of suffering. That's what renunciation is, like compassion for yourself. It's a good way to put it. Then you can start to see your mind. Then you can start to see your mind. Before it becomes physical. That's the trick. In other words, we don't know we're angry until we're shaking. We don't know we're depressed until we're inert in bed, because we don't pay attention, to the mind. So first harness the energy, the body and speech, then we can start to be noticing the mind. And what that means is not noticing feelings. Feelings are when the body's involved. They're just an indicator. Feelings in the body are merely an indicator of something going on in your mind. It's a good way to put it. The body's very gross, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But we're so dominated by the body, we make the body the boss, and we so kind of captivated by our feelings, our physical feelings, what we feel, we say. It's not very precise. As we start to become familiar with our mind, we're going to start to notice, like we say in the West, there are 1,000 thoughts a second. All our feelings, from the Buddhist analysis, all our feelings are rooted, are driven by, underpinned by thoughts. Initially, that's surprising. But Buddha, honestly, is your best cognitive therapist. The best. He's the absolute genius at it. It's literally what Buddha is, Cognitive, there's so many versions of it I've heard, cognitive or behavioral therapist, whatever. That's exactly right. By changing your thoughts, you change yourself. It's exactly what Buddha is saying. The difference is the radical degree to which you can change yourself. You can turn yourself into a Buddha. That's the hardest job for us. We know, actually, we do know that our thoughts never stop. We do know that our head is racing all day, and especially if we're upset and stressed about something. We know the thoughts are we know they are literally thoughts. We know that. But we call them feelings, and we don't really notice them until they're too late, Because if there's 1,000 thoughts a second, Buddha would agree. It's very hard to hear each thought. It's impossible in the beginning. And the other part of the tragedy of these of the negative ones, the unhappy ones, these thoughts, they're so absolute in their story. It's like a script in our head. They're so absolute. They're so absolutely concrete. If you don't like somebody, meaning you have anger towards them, aversion for them. We usually give a reason. Either it could just be we don't like the way they look. A deeper reason would be because they harmed us. That tends to be how it is. We don't like their politics or whatever, or the ex-boyfriend who harmed me. That can be very true. But what we can't see is what we can't distinguish. What we can't distinguish in our mind, which is a really important thing to distinguish. What we can't distinguish between is the action they did to harm us, the boyfriend who cheated on you. That is a fact. Let's say it's a fact. They did cheat on you. But we find it impossible to distinguish between that fact and the aversion we feel. Because we assume the aversion, the anger, is logical and reasonable because they harm me. In just the same way that you stub your toe, you assume it's logical and reasonable to be angry about it. We can't distinguish. This is a huge thing to start to see. Forget the boyfriend one. Forget the boyfriend, but even just look at the body. We're so dominant, like I said, we're so dominated by our body. And because attachment inside our mind is constantly craving happy feelings, pleasant feelings, first and foremost, the body. The millisecond, the smallest thing, the slightest stub of the toe, isn't it? It's called an unpleasant feeling does arise in the body. That's true, it's a fact. But the next trillionth of a second, we curse, swear, get angry, And we assume they are logically linked. And I don't have a choice. What do you mean? Of course I'm angry. I stubbed my toe. Not to mention, of course I'm angry. My boyfriend cheated on me. We see it as absolutely logical, and we see it as having no, it's natural. We'd say natural. And what we mean by natural is you'd be unnatural not to do it. But this is the point the Buddha's making, and this is another discussion here, but it's a really good one. We have sensory consciousness. Sensory consciousness. Basically, that's feelings, pleasant or unpleasant. Eye consciousness, ear, tactile, so on, you know. Especially the tactile, isn't it? The taste and the tactile are most vivid. Well, the smell one's pretty strong too. And oh no, these all, aren't they? They're all strong. Maybe the taste one, maybe that too. So they were dominated by those. And attachment, which is in the mental consciousness, is continuously driving us to make sure we get, select, meet an object of the five senses that triggers only a pleasant feeling. And we desperately tried, attachment gets us to avoid things that will trigger an unpleasant feeling in just the body. And then we have the mental response, which is these neurotic states of mind. These are mental states. Attachment is a mental state. Attachment, anger, all these unhappy ones. They are in their nature are very painful, but they're very specific stories in the mind. They're very specific interpretations of that event. They're an interpretation of the boyfriend who cheated. The cheating might be a fact. The stubbing of the toe is a fact, but we can't see we are doing an interpretation of it. That's the mental consciousness. And that's the one we have to learn to become familiar with. The thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions, feelings that are actually viewpoints and interpretations. And some of them are neurotic, distorted, exaggerated, I-based, fear-based, attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem. And the others are reasonable, appropriate, virtuous, reasonable states of mind, reasonable interpretations. And all the Buddha is saying is that the first lot cause incredible pain, and the second lot don't. So in other words, if you stub your toe, if you get angry, you're going to feel extra miserable about it. But if you have a reasonable interpretation, well, you know, you check it, oh, it's only the toe, and you notice the feeling, and you see it's going to pass. It's going to pass in a second. It's okay. Then it's not nearly as much suffering. We all know that. So this is already a revelation, you know, in the way we work on our mind. Be our own therapist. So the first job, at least harness the body and the speech and refrain from doing heavy negative actions, ones that harm others, because they will cause us suffering. And of course, to do that, we have to have confidence in this idea that we produce ourselves, which is another discussion for us, you know. And then to get this understanding, being our own therapist, means dealing with the mental consciousness, your thoughts and feelings and emotions. And how basically from the first second you wake up until the second you go to sleep, we live in that world of our mental consciousness, our thoughts, and where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. And basically what it's doing is interpreting every second. It is interpreting our physical experiences and the outside world. But the tragedy is we don't think it's an interpretation. That's the problem. We think it's the truth. So we know the boyfriend cheated, but because we have a tendency to be very jealous, let's say, that jealousy drives our interpretation of the boyfriend, and we don't ever think for 1 second it's an opinion about the boyfriend, driven by jealousy. We assume it's a truth coming along with the fact that he cheated on me. We assume it's a truth. How dare that happen to me? I stubbed my toe and I'm so depressed. We can't distinguish between that and the stubbing of the toe, but they're completely separate events. Even beginning to understand this is a revelation for us. The key thing behind all of these instructions of the Buddha is to help us suffer less. We're not discussing helping others yet. That's more advanced. That's compassion. That comes later. This is all about how to help oneself. We are the beneficiary of this practice. This is the point of it. This is the point behind the renunciation component of the path. We are the beneficiary of this level of practice. We are the beneficiary of knowing our own mind, distinguishing between sensory and mental, identifying between the neuroses and the virtues in the mental. This is the stuff of being a Buddhist, you know. Do you have any questions? Seeing as we're 45 minutes late, I have to speed everything up. Any questions? People? Nothing? Yes.
The ethical foundation of mind training.
But say it again.
The ethical foundation of mind training that you're discussing gets presented here as a lot of don'ts.
That's right, of course.
Were there do's?
Oh, that comes later. You've got to do the don'ts first. I think I've got a feeling you've got to, I think we've got to, okay. Okay. If you're going to learn to drive a car, okay, you'd have both it together, but you'd have a list of hundreds of don'ts, would you not? Do not put the foot on the brake at the same time as the accelerator. Do not put the left indicator out if you turn right. Do not go over the speed limit. There are hundreds of don'ts, and you are happy to learn them. You don't feel they're being restrictive. See, that's already the point. As soon as we hear it when it comes to behavior, we hear it as restriction, we hear it as punishment, we hear it as naughty. That's how we hear it. But when you learn how to make a cake, you have to learn both. Don't do this, and don't put the fire up too high, and don't put too many eggs, as well as do this and do that. Of course you do. But we delight in doing that. We don't hear it as punitive. Are you hearing me? That's this view we have. We have it as, we hear it as punishment. We hear it as punitive. We hear it as somebody saying, don't do that, and if you do, you'll get punished. That's my point. It's so deep in our bones, that view. Do you understand me? It's interesting, isn't it, to look at it like that? And anyway, the only reason for someone to say, you know, the only reason for the Buddha, let's say the Buddha in this case, to suggest you start by not killing and not stealing and not harming, rather than please be kind and loving and compassionate, the assumption has to be that we are already uncontrolled. If you're not uncontrolled, if you already have perfect behavior, then you can go to the next level quite quickly. Do you see my point? But I think your point is exactly the point I'm making. We hear it in that way. We hear it as restrictive, punitive, don't do, you're naughty. And don't blame our Jewish mother or our Catholic mother for that. The Buddha says that's coming from this misconception of ego. It's a dualistic view in the bones of our being. It's very interesting. Do you understand me? I mean, when you learn to drive a car, you absolutely, you will learn immediately the things you shouldn't do, and you'll internalize them so totally, you'd never in a million years ever put the foot on the accelerator as well as the brake. You just would never, you have to hear that instruction. It's a specific instruction. You can't be told any other way. Do you see what I'm saying? And you want to learn it, and you internalize it, and you'd never do it in a million years because you know the terrible consequences. But to hear it like that, it sounds fundamental when it comes to morality. It sounds like fundamentalist. Do you understand? It's interesting, isn't it? It's such a good point. It's how we hear it. We always hear it like that. And I think if you're a very devoted Christian, you wouldn't hear it in a bad way. You'd be so happy because you want to be oneness with God. You want to be oneness with God. You would never dare to go. You wouldn't want to go against God's will. But if it's seen in a punitive way, and you're a guilty and neurotic, like I hear people are religious. I mean, I was a Catholic. I loved God. I was in love with God, but I never thought of him as my creator. I never had guilt. But I hear some people have unbelievable suffering from their Christian or their Jewish upbringing because we hear it that way. Do you understand? It's very interesting. So let's analyze that. Okay, from the Buddhist perspective, I think what's behind this one In the Buddha's analysis of the mind, effectively, from the Four Noble Truths point of view, Buddha's first teaching about suffering and its causes, effectively, he says the main cause of suffering in the world in day-to-day life is attachment. Technically, if we look at Buddhist psychology, we know it's the root delusion, marigpa, ignorance, this root misconception of an independent self. That's the root. But effectively in daily life, Buddha's saying attachment runs the show. And this is hard for us to see because we don't even think of it this way in our culture, in our psychology. And I would say, so attachment is this constant dissatisfaction. Its main energy is dissatisfaction. There's an assumption that I'm somehow not enough. I somehow don't have enough. Now, first of all, I don't have enough. And when it's really deep, it's I am not enough. And we have that in bucket loads, don't we, in our culture? We see it. No one teaches us that. We just assume we're not enough. We're not good enough. We're not beautiful enough. Our nose is not enough, and our mouth is not enough, and our experiences are not enough, and you don't love me enough. It was not enough food. This is the depth of the suffering of attachment. The suffering of having practiced attachment. We're born with this dissatisfaction. So then it brings us emotional hunger to get the thing that's missing. So the obvious first level is the objects of the senses. But a deeper level of attachment, which takes us time to see, but it's so subtle, but I think it's rooted. It's the source of what we're just discussing here. The should and shouldn't and all that, and guilty and bad, is rooted in this deepest attachment. The most primordial, since we're born, is the attachment to being approved of. So when that's very strong in us, what drives us every second, when we hear that mummy says, don't do this, we will really internalize it. And what mainly causes us to not do it is we're terrified that we'll get punished by mummy, we'll get disapproved of. Punishment is disapproval. And we crave to be approved of. We crave to be seen as a good girl. So that's what drives most of us to do what mummy says, because we want her to love us. So that's the most painful attachment of all. And I think that's got a lot to do with this seeing everything as judgmental. We're terrified of being judged. We're terrified of being disapproved of. We crave to be approved of. So we crave to be judged in a good way, in other words. Put it that way. That's a hugely neurotic state of mind. And it's the deepest attachment of all, more than for sex and drugs and rock and roll. And it's hard to identify. Frankly, I think it's the last attachment to go when you finally realize emptiness, This sense of a separate I, and this attachment, we define ourselves, in fact, in terms of how we are seen by others. That's pretty intense. Well, every being in the universe has it, dogs and monkeys as well. So subtle, we don't notice. In other words, if it's really strong, that's how we adjust our behavior, our words, our actions, everything. We adjust them to make sure we get the right response from the person in front of us. We often say, oh, I won't say that because I don't want to upset him. No, you won't say that because you're scared he won't like you. He will reject you. He will not approve of you. Most simply, not like me. That's the deepest attachment. And when we have that very strong, then of course, we're going to feel sat upon, pressed down on, judged, don't you? And then we resist it, we go against it. Don't you tell me what to do. I can do what I like, we'll say. We'll fly up against it, we'll rebel against it. Anybody else have any points, questions? Somebody online? Who is there here? Somebody? No. Nobody? Yes, come on then, talk to me, go. Microphone, please, just here. Right here.
Good evening, Robina. Thanks for teaching us.
Good morning.
I've been experiencing this strange phenomenon lately. Despite all aspects of my life objectively being what I would say in a good place.
In a good place?
Yes.
Good.
I've been drowning in complaints lately.
In what?
Complaints.
From other people?
No, inner complaints, just complaining all day in my head.
Oh, dissatisfied, in other words.
Okay.
Not enough. Or is that what you're saying? Things aren't enough, you're not doing enough, it's not right enough, it's not good. You're criticizing yourself or others?
Myself. And
Okay.
just situations in myself.
Okay.
Just drowning in it. And I don't know if I'm just noticing it happening more or it isn't.
You know, I think it's a good point. I think this is really what this attachment is about, this dissatisfaction. And I think it is that everybody's got it. It is really just a very natural, you know, even if you're a kind, happy, loving person. I mean, okay, we have the virtuous states of mind. We have the compassion and the empathy and the kindness and the patience. They're all there and they're our saving grace, right? And they're the ones that cause us happiness. They're the ones that make our lives reasonable and people to, you know, things to work well. Then the other stuff's there. And even if, as you say, things are going well, I really do think it's because you're noticing the mind more. This is very natural in all minds until you're quite highly advanced, the Buddhist view would say, to be dissatisfied. Things aren't enough. It's not good enough, which means finding fault. Yes, exactly. I think you're seeing it more. I mean, classically in the text, they talk about to get to accomplish single-pointed concentration. This technique the Indians invented before the Buddha. It's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivating, okay? And I remember Pabonko Rinpoche says that one of the signs of success at the first of the 9 is that you think your mind's getting worse, because we are noticing. This, I think anybody does any therapy. You go to a therapist, you thought maybe you're a bit crummy and things are a bit bad. They start unpacking. You can't believe how much garbage is there, right? Do you all agree? I mean, it's all there, but because we're trying to be good boys and good girls very desperately, we either hide it away, or life is so busy and the senses are so loud, we ignore it. When we start to pay attention, we start to harness our energy and practice, of course you're going to notice it more. You know, it can scare the life out of us. Do you understand? So you should be delighted. Okay, now you're seeing what's there already. Yes. Huh?
There's a question online.
Yes.
And the question is, what can we do when others around us, family members, etc., are so attached to negative emotions?
I understand. I'd love it. Who is saying, may I know who's saying
Susan.
that? Who's saying it?
Susan?
Where are you, Susan? Hello, Susan, talk to me. Talk to me, sweetheart. Unmute yourself and say it. I'd like to hear you say it.
Sorry, I am. I think your teachings are amazing, and I can see how they benefit my life and the direction that it goes in. But I'm surrounded by family members that are very much attached to their depression or their negative emotions, and I'm just wondering, what's the best I can do, because I do get drawn into it.
Of course, Susan,
yeah.
So let me just ask a couple more questions then to get a bit more precise about your scenario. I mean, do you have 4 husbands and 7 babies? And
No.
What is it? One person, 7 people?
2 young adult children that are suffering, and
What,
2 young adult children that are suffering and
young adults in your, they live with you. They live with you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And you're their mum.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that helps to understand, darling.
Okay, good.
I mean, you're in the okay. I mean, I can't imagine. Frankly, I can't imagine being a parent living with 2 young adults. I mean, they'd be dead young adults if they were mine. Quite frankly. Because I mean, we can see our own stuff is already too much, and to deal with somebody else's. That's why families are so dynamic and so intense. I mean, Susan, oh God, there's so many levels of answers. I mean, we assume if you're on this, I was going to say television show. What's it called? This show we're on here. You've got some kind of practice. Is that right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can keep your microphone off. I want a conversation with you. I think one of the things I know in my family, when I was brought up, there were 7 siblings, and my mother and father were poor, and we only had 6 beds. We didn't forget about not a bedroom for each person. We had 6 beds. We had to share beds. So of course, because there was such intense proximity to each other, we're all human beings. You're going to kill each other or get killed, one or the other, scream and yell and fight and get upset. It's just natural if we live close together. So for me, I mean, it never occurred to my mother. I mean, she didn't have the money anyway, because you always tend to dump all the kids together. I mean, you've got 2, right? But I know that for me, when I was so naughty, this is my point, my mother sent me to boarding school because I was so naughty. But for me, it was the most miraculous event, because suddenly I had my own bed, my own space, and I became like a reasonable human being all of a sudden, because you put me in a different situation. So forget trying to change them, forget that, just make them, for me, the most powerful thing is to find the way to have your own bit of space. I mean, this solves 90% of your problems, if you can. I mean, to really make that a conscious decision that you keep out of their way if you can. I mean, it's really hard, because if you're their mother, there's masses of attachment. You're totally involved in their lives. You adore them as well, and you want them to be happy and to help them. And so, of course, that being a mother as well, you think it's your job to make all their suffering go away. I mean, that's 90% of the problem. So to have any control and not to not to buy into every one of their stories is really hard. So, I mean, one of the most precious things is to have your own space. I mean, surely that's the first point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I totally do. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's tremendously important. But I think it's another whole kettle of fish being a mother, because attachment is so gigantic, added on to the love and compassion, And so, okay, let's look at attachment in the case of being a mother. Attachment is a part of your mind that sticks its nose in their business. That's what attachment does. It sticks its nose in their business. So everything they say, it's as if you just said it, as if it's you, we can't distinguish. So of course you make it your story, you make it your drama, and you buy into it and you want to help them. But I mean, if you realize that attachment is one thing, but the wish to be beneficial is something else. Loving them, wanting them to be happy is something else. They're virtuous states of mind. So your main job, one of them, is to distinguish between when it's attachment and when it's virtue. So virtuous response would be, oh, really, sweetheart? I'm sure you can handle it. You've got wisdom, instead of rushing in and trying to solve everything or buying into all their dramas. I mean, that's because you've got attachment. Attachment only wants lovely things, only wants them to be happy and perfect. And when it doesn't get that, it sticks its nose in to try and manipulate it. Do you see what I'm saying? And then you get aversion and anxiety. Anxiety is just a polite word for mild anger, because attachment's not getting what it wants, So that part of you has to be really learned to be controlled when you're with other people, when you're with them. And then just at least shutting, unless the other one, just zip the lip, Susan. If you just did not say the words, 90% of the problems are solved. Allow them to be who they are, not to solve their problem. Love them for who they are. Watch like a hawk, but keep your nose to yourself and keep the mouth shut. This, I swear to you, it sounds so simple, but it's quite profound. Are we communicating?
Yeah, it totally is. Thank you.
And, and bye, guys, I'm going to my room now, and let them be, I mean, it takes tremendous effort, because attachment wants to be around the object all the time.
And fix it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah. Good, darling. Well done, Susan. Congratulations. Okay. Who else, people? Somebody else. Questions, people, discussion, conversation. Eileen.
Thank you, Robina. So what you're saying is, if we have, given what Susan was talking about, if we have a very strong reaction to somebody else's anger, then that's about our attachment to wanting that person to not.
I mean, that's the one about, listen, Eileen, it's like the stubbing the toe is one thing and your response is another. But because when it's people we're close to, we can't distinguish between their anger and ours. We just kind of absorb into each other like sponges. And it's very hard to distinguish between their anger and our response. Or what we tend to do is we say, oh, they're so angry, and we blame them for our anger. But we've got to realize there's 2 separate things, There's me and there's them.
Right.
And that's why we've got to know our danger areas. If you've got a tendency to get angry easily and you live with people who are very angry, you've got to be really careful to protect yourself, you know.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that's why it's incredibly difficult. I can't imagine living with more than one human being. I don't know how you do it, quite frankly. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
I'm not
Thank you.
kidding. I really mean it.
Very hard.
Unless you're very, very passive or something. I don't know. Then it's terrible. Then it comes out later. When you're 97, you know, all the passivity comes, you get PTSD triple or something. You call the stuff undealt with stuff for 47 years, you know. I mean, anyway, whatever. Yeah, you understand, Eileen? Good. Yes, at the back there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robina, for the talk.
Good.
I've been watching you on Zoom.
Oh, good, darling.
Doing entire meditation.
Good Lord.
Yes, my question is, what to do with love attachment?
What to
When
do?
you break up with someone?
What to do with what?
What do you do with love attachment?
Non-attachment.
With love.
Love.
Attachment. When you had a boyfriend and you break up, but no one cheated.
No one what?
No one cheated.
Okay, just broke up.
You broke up, and then you continue thinking that it was your fault.
Okay, I understand. I can't. Yeah, I know. It's so painful. Was it sort of mutual, or did he leave you, or she leave you?
I think he left.
You think? He was quite subtle. He was quite subtle, was he?
He was an initiator, yes.
He initiated it. He suggested a good idea. You stop together. Yeah, I know. So, darling, I know. I mean, you see, attachment is this such an unhappy little person. It's like a little person inside us who's always not satisfied with me, not satisfied with who we are, not satisfied with how good we are, and then always wanting more. So even if you were in the relationship, if it's still going, you're still thinking it's your fault. You're still thinking it's not enough what he's doing, or you're not enough. It's more amplified now because he's not there. But that's very sort of natural, unless you have such strong aversion to him. But obviously you don't have that. You're not angry with him, are you? Are you angry with him? No anger. Sadness a little bit. Go on, darling. You're trying to find what? Keep the mic, darling. What are you saying?
No, because my psychologist told me that you cannot blame yourself. I'm trying to find a mutual blame. So for him and for me.
I understand. So, okay, keep the mic. So let's analyze this. Okay. If you're saying it's your fault, there's an assumption that it was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. Would you agree with that? There has to be the assumption that it shouldn't have happened.
Yes.
So, why should a relationship last forever? I mean, it's a good question. Why should it? Because obviously there's an assumption. Are you looking for a relationship to last forever? Is that what you want? I mean, if you want it, I'm happy for you, but is that what you want?
I think that's
nothing wrong with that. Pardon?
Yeah, that's a dream to have someone.
Okay, good. So good. This explains why you think it was wrong. I mean, if you just want to sleep around, when I was having boyfriends, I never thought of living with one person. It was a dumb idea. I was sleeping around, so it was never a mistake if he left. Well, I mean, I'd feel guilty or bad because I thought he didn't love me, you know, but it wasn't. So if you do want a relationship and you thought maybe this was the one, did you, for a while? You were hoping this might have been it. I'm not complaining. You've got to see your mind. Huh? Sweetie, I'm asking you.
Could you please paraphrase that question?
Okay, I'm sorry. So there seemed to be how long were you together? 2 years, 1 year, 6 months?
No, it was like 6 months.
Okay, so you were hoping this would be the guy. Is that what you're saying? That's perfectly fine, sweetheart. But then it didn't work out. So there is an assumption that it shouldn't have happened. So maybe you got to first look at that. That's a view you put on it. It's like you've got a beautiful cup and it broke. We think it shouldn't have happened. Well, you know, guess what? Cups are made to break. Relationships are the same. Even if you did last together, at some point he would die. I mean, he's going to leave you again, and then you'll really think it's your fault. Things change. That's one of the Buddha's first teachings, that things are impermanent. It sounds so kind of boring. But there's an assumption that somehow cups shouldn't break, relationships shouldn't end, but it's completely irrational. Certain things, some relationships have a small life. When you're at school, you love that girl for 1 year, and the next year you don't remember her name. Things just have a small life, so maybe look at that and accept that's just fine. Now, on the other hand, if there is something you can learn about yourself from that relationship, that's good. We're all human. Maybe you learn you were too grasping. Maybe you got too annoyed. I mean, you've got to look at these. Don't exaggerate your badness, but we're all human and we can learn from our mistakes. We can learn about ourselves. So look at it intelligently. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Do you see? Take responsibility.
Yeah, but then the blame comes.
So I beg your pardon? I beg your pardon?
When I'm learning what I could have done better.
I know, but I'm telling you to be more intelligent about it and not go into self-pity. That's what I'm suggesting. You know, you don't just, oh, I'm not going to blame myself. I was perfect. Be real. We're human beings. So have enough courage, enough humility to look at your mind. And if there is something you can learn about yourself from this experience, then you can grow from it. That's how you can see it. That's a more productive, grown-up way to learn from something. Are we communicating?
Yes.
That's up to you to decide to change the way you think. Are we communicating?
What about the next cup? Why am I worrying about the next cup is gonna break?
That's why I'm suggesting you grow up, try to be a big girl, and look at this. And if there is something you can learn about yourself from that relationship, do you not think you are a work in progress as a human being? Do you? Okay, then, well, then grow up about it, darling. I'm not saying you don't have to see it in a negative way. See it in a positive way. It's up to you, sweetheart. Are you communicating with me?
Yes, I think I understand you, yes.
Well, do your best. Try and be positive. Learn from it. Accept that this is life. Things change. That's okay. It doesn't mean you necessarily are the blame for anything. If you consider it something natural, there's nothing to blame. But if you can learn from yourself, about yourself, surely that's what we should do in everything we ever do, in your relationship with your mother, with your sister, with your boss, at work. It's a learning experience about ourselves and how to be a better human being. Are we communicating? See it as just part of your growth as a human being. Then you'll be more positive about it and be more realistic and more honest with yourself and not either defensive or beating yourself up, you know. Are we communicating, sweetheart? Do your best. Okay, good. Someone else. Please, yes. Here. Yes.
So you said that there is a difference between how the facts and how we feel and interpret it in our mind. And if you watch that, it will make a difference. So, for example, there are some facts that you mentioned, like being jealous. So I am feeling jealous, and I know that it's just, how I'm feeling. It's not related to the facts. But would that help me just knowing that this is not, related to the fact necessarily?
Yes, I think it's a huge point, The Buddha's point, one way of saying what the Buddha's saying is, there's life out there, and we can establish facts. There is a war. Mr. Trump did say that. He has got hair this way. He has got certain positions. You can say that they are facts. There are these things you can establish are facts. That we can all agree are facts. Somebody kicked the dog. Someone shouted at her daughter. We can say they are facts. We've got to be careful because we've got to be careful because our opinion about it, we don't realize is distorting it. The Buddha's main point is when we've got a bunch of delusions in the mind, anger and attachment and jealousy and all these states of mind, they're very, very specific in the way they function. They cause us to be miserable, but and this is very much for your point, those states of mind distort the way the event appears to me. So if you've got very strong, let's say, what's your name? Euler. Oh, like Euler.
OLGA.
Olga. Okay. Olya, like you're Russian or something. Okay, darling. Olya. Let's say Olya has very low self-esteem. Let's just think she really thinks she's a creep. Then obviously her interpretation of that breakup will sound terrible. Oh, I'm a disaster. I did the terrible things. I must be so bad. He left me. Do you understand me? And you can see it objectively that it's actually not like that at all. You can see a person who's really angry with someone else and they're screaming and saying, he is doing this and he is doing that. But you can say, excuse me, I'm not seeing that at all. It's obvious two people see the same thing differently. That's how delusions work. So our tragedy is we can't distinguish between what we're thinking and what's there, because it colors the thing out there. It's very hard to distinguish. This is a massively important job to do.
So my question.
Yes.
My question is that I caught my.
Make it closer to the mic, please. Yes, darling.
So my question is, I catch myself in those moments.
Yes.
I know it for a fact that, you're just exaggerating.
That's right. So the question.
But would that mind watching help me to get it, to feel better? Is it a practice that if you catch,
But that's what I thought we were discussing. I thought we were discussing that. So what I just said didn't help.
No, I mean, so if I.
Therefore, what's the action from what I just said? Look at your mind and observe that you're having an angry interpretation, a jealous interpretation, an attached interpretation. That's what you've got to see what your thoughts are saying. You've got to see it. So if you've got strong attachment, it's very simple. You've got strong attachment to a certain person, totally attached, which means they look, it's coming from low self-esteem, it's coming from emotional hunger, it's coming from the craving to have someone adore you. So this attachment is hungry, it's emotional, it's neurotic, and then it paints a very delicious picture onto this person, and it makes them look totally divine. Are you seeing what I'm saying? So now his ex-girlfriend can see you're completely demented. She knows he's cheating on you. She knows it, but you're as blind as a bat because you're seeing him through the lenses of your own emotional needs. So yes, that's the whole point. So we've got to first own what's in here, and it's very hard, and then see how that causes, how that literally interprets the thing out there. So when there's masses of attachment, you just see a divine picture. Now, equally, if you hate this person, you're really angry and everything he does is evil, you're clearly exaggerating. Do you understand me? So that's what learning about our mind is. So that by you seeing your mind and changing that story, then the person will appear different to you. Let's say your mother's been mean to you all of your life and you've decided you're going to forgive her. You're changing your story radically. You're writing a brand new script about your mother. You're starting to see good things about her. You say it, she did this, she did that, and before you know it, your mother will appear beautiful to you. Big surprise. So how things appear out there, as Lama Zopa puts it, is through the lenses of what's in here. This is the really profound point. But our tragedy is we don't think that. We don't realize we're having an opinion. We think it's true. Do you understand? This is a massive point, darling. So keep learning about your mind. That's it. Do you understand me? Good. As they say in Buddhist psychology, the world out there appears back to us. According to what's in the mind. I really think we can see this every day, but we don't join the dots, When we can get this, it is profound. It's getting to the essence of Buddha's approach, So giving up anger and giving up jealousy and giving up attachment, all these interpretations, doesn't mean suddenly the world looks so lovely. Oh, he's not really bad. Mr. Trump is nice after all. His policies are really good. Let's just say. It doesn't mean that. There's still a war in Ukraine. A person still kicked the dog. They're facts. So you don't change. You don't suddenly say, oh, that wasn't stubbing my toe after all. You don't say that. Then you can deal with what's there. You can, when you learn to work on your mind, then you can deal with what's out there in a far more intelligent way, you know. And if you want to change the world, get out there. I always quote Martin Luther King. He said it's good to find fault, to see the world. There is injustice, there is suffering, there is racism. But then you say, what can I do to help? Not just rant and rave and scream and yell, you know, and have a mental breakdown. What can I do to help? Then it's amazing, you know. So the first job is work on our mind. Then the compassion wing comes. That's the bodhisattva part. That's later. That's more advanced. You can't help even a fly until you can help yourself, you know. That's the wisdom wing. That's the first and second parts of, that's the junior school and high school practice. Work on your body, work on your speech, work on your mind. Turn yourself into a marvelous, fulfilled, content person. Then you can be of benefit to others, you know, because you'll see them clearly and the world won't freak you out. Whether you're living with them like Susan or whether you're living in the world, you know, same thing. You have enough wisdom. You become, I love this phrase, in our culture we say you become your own person. When you're full of attachment and neediness and emotional hunger and anger, you kind of like, you sort of, you're really a schizophrenic. You're completely linked. You can't tell fact from fiction. You're all messed up and kind of all involved in everybody else. You know, you can't see where you begin and they begin. When you lessen attachment and lessen neuroses, you become more clear in yourself. Things aren't pulling you all the time from pillar to post, you know. Become your own person. You're not becoming different. You become more clear, more steady, and you can interpret things better. That's the job to be done. That's being your own therapist. Who else is there? Somebody else on Zoom has something to say? No? All right. Who else? Sunday. Where are you, darling? I can find you. Hello. Yes, talk to me, sweetheart.
I had posted
Can't hear you,
it
darling.
on the chat, but
Now I can.
basically, so you know, every morning I set an intention that I'm going to not hurt people and to not harm anybody or think badly or say anything mean. And then my boss says something nasty to me or she criticizes me, and I immediately,
That's it.
immediately
I know.
say something to a coworker.
Exactly.
She is the worst. And
That's
then
right.
I come home and I think she's no different than me. We're, you know,
I tell
how
you,
do I
see,
get
I
a
think
little
Sunday.
space?
Okay, so listen. I think in our world we tend not to think of practices to do with speech. It sounds so silly to have a meditation practice to do with speech, but I really mean it. So the first thing, if we can control, like I said to Susan, you know, or to Eileen, if we can control our speech first, and I know your point, it's very hard. So, but it's not going to happen until you make a decision. So this sounds very silly, but it's quite profound. There's a saying in Tibetan, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought. And that's the meaning of the word intention, not motivation, but bare bones, I will. So if you make a powerful, like, you know, I don't know if you have a Buddhist practice, but at the end of the day, we have this purification practice and you regret the things you've done because you're sick of the bloody suffering. And then you make a decision, I will do this and I will do that and I won't do this. And you go to bed. The next morning you wake up, you know you're going to go to work and you have to make a clear, intentional decision to yourself. Today, Sunday, I am going to shut my mouth. I will not open my mouth for one day. Until you say that, you won't change. You have to make it a decision. It's sort of like until you say, I will go on a diet, you will never go on a diet. But when you say, I will today only eat that much food, then you will do it. The power of intention. You make a decision. You have to make that part of your practice Sunday.
Yeah.
I
will.
really mean it, darling. It won't happen otherwise.
Thank you.
Otherwise, just get guilty and neurotic, and I shouldn't do that, and I did it again. You make a firm decision, and it will guide you. You know, if you've just decided to go on a diet, and you really are sticking to it, it's like standing on your shoulder, and when the cake is there, you will not have another piece. You have made a decision. Intentionally deciding to do something is the main cause of doing it, Sunday.
Thank you.
So
That really helps.
one day at a time, darling. It's like one day at a time, like the alcoholics, one day at a time.
Thanks.
I really
Thank
mean
you.
it. And you will see the difference, and you'll be so happy. I promise you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, darling. Like you go to family things, you know, when you go to, so the nightmare for most people. But you just decide. You decide, okay, I'm going to go for 3 hours, and the ugly old uncle will be there, my drunk mother will be there, my wretched sister will be there, and my white supremacist niece will be there. You decide, I'm going to go, and I'm going to let them do and say exactly what they like, and I'm going to just be a happy girl and shut my mouth. You will succeed. It'll be over you. It'll be above you, I promise. But you've got to decide. And this is really what practice is every day. That's why the 4 opponent powers, if you've got a Tibetan Buddhist practice, doing the practice at the end of the day, acknowledging and regretting the dumb things you've done because you're sick of the suffering, then you're having compassion for the ones you've harmed, then you do a little practice, and then you make decisions. I will not this, and I will not that, or I will this, and I will that, and you go to bed with a happy mind. It's intentional. We only will ever do something if you intend to. You can say for 27 years, you know, oh, I must go on a diet. You never will go until you say, I will go on a diet. Or, you know, oh, hello, Robina, you must come for a meal one day. Well, it's true, but I won't come until you say, come tomorrow at 12 o'clock. It's got to be intentional, precise, intentional. It's sort of obvious. It's like a to-do list. I will do this today, and I will do that today. We'll include this in your to-do list. If this is how things work, it's practical psychology. Instead of, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and I'm a bad person, what did I do wrong? And oh my God, a blur, 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 you know? And it's one step at a time. Intentional. Everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, I will. It's very powerful, actually. And it works. Then you fall off the wagon, you pick it up and you do it again. You know, before you know it, you'll be getting used to it. What else, people? What should we talk about? I want to make up for my lost time. I'm sorry. I'm feeling guilty. What time is it? What time is it? What? 8:30? We can speak a bit longer if you want to feel like you've been cheated. I don't want you to feel cheated. I'm sorry. Come on, please. Is there something you want to talk about before we finish? Some topic?
Hello, I have a question.
What?
So when you mentioned before that
Sweetie pie, it's a bit hard for me to hear. I'm kind of 90% deaf here.
Shut your mouth and have understanding and have to be at peace.
What's she saying?
When you see someone who's being difficult.
When you see someone who's being difficult you mean to you?
Yes.
Okay, they're being angry with you. They're being problem.
For example,
Okay, so go on. The question.
Someone who had a problem with family, for example. But when to know, you close your mouth, you don't say anything.
What, sweetheart?
When you say, close your mouth, don't say anything. But when to know, like, to define the.
I think if you just take the microphone, I'm a bit deaf, you see, and this, just come close, come and talk to me here. No, I'll hear you better. I'm so sorry. I keep trying to put in those hearing aids, but I can't cope. Speak to me. Take the microphone away. Just talk to me.
How to know when, for example, someone is being difficult? Or somebody mentioned before with the family, right?
Yes, that's right.
How to know not to pay attention?
I understand.
Mouth,
I understand, darling.
Or when to say,
I understand.
don't cross the border.
Or when to say what?
This is not okay. Like,
oh, okay, okay. That's a huge. Now go and sit down and relax. Now I heard your question. It's a huge question, sweetheart. And I mean, it's all It depends upon, listen to me now. It depends upon the context. If you're walking down the street and that happens with a stranger, then that's one situation. If it's your sister, it's another situation. If it's your mother, so maybe you've got to be a little bit more precise with me. Who is this person you're thinking about? Yeah, a close person, a distant person, a colleague at work? A colleague at work. Okay, so you have to work with this person every day. Is that right? Well, okay, that's a very specific situation, and that's a long-term thing. I mean, it's a crazy dude on the street, you can scream at them, it's okay, you know? But at work, you've got to live with this person. So you've got to have the wisdom to know. So if you don't have that wisdom, you're going to be in trouble. But what's your tendency? Is your tendency to be quiet and let them be mean to you? Is your tendency to be quiet and let them be horrible? What, darling? You mean sometimes you argue with this person? You see, I think to say to anybody, I think it's quite dangerous. I think it's quite heavy to have to say to somebody who you have to work with every day, whether it's your sister or a colleague, that's not good behavior, because that's criticizing. If they're about to abuse you, I mean, if it's a man wants to stick his hand up your skirt, well, tell him to fuck off, okay? It depends on that situation. If it's that kind of scenario, is it that kind of scenario? Some abusive man being rude to you? Not like that. Okay, I'm trying to get what it is, but I can't hear it. Is it a female? Is she your boss? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. You see, you've got to give the whole context. If it's your boss, sweetheart, then you really got to look at yourself. You've really got to look at yourself and see if you really want this job. That's maybe your first question. Is it quite difficult working with this person? You want to be there. You want to do the job. You appreciate this person in general. But okay, so you feel they're kind of bossy to you. They criticize your work all the time. What, dear? It can get what? It can get toxic. Toxic. Oh, it's such a big word. What do you mean by toxic? Speak to me. Come here. You see, these general questions, you've got to bring it down to the specifics, otherwise it's impossible. What do you mean toxic, darling?
Toxic more in the office when there is a deadline.
What, dear?
When there is, for example, a deadline.
And what does she behave like? Give an example.
Critical, but also because she's anxious now, everybody's anxious, and you start to feel like this is. So
I understand. So she's anxious. So that's fine. So she's anxious, and naturally.
No, but sometimes it's also get very criticizing with no.
What?
It gets very not per se with me per se,
yeah.
But in general, with me sometimes too. When she's very stressed, she will become very, very critical to everyone. And
she shouts and yells, or just criticism?
Oh, just criticism.
And is it every day or once a week?
Oh, once a week. Maybe.
Once a week.
We work in a very like.
Well, sweetie pie, I mean, oh, come on. Oh, you're a big girl. Yes. If you like, okay, this is why this is the first question. Do you want to be in this job?
Oh, I want to be in this field.
You want to be in this job. You're learning this job is useful to you. You're learning your profession in this job. So you realize you are learning something. So that if this job is boring to you, then it's easy to say, no, I don't put up with it. But you have to see the benefits to you of this job. You have to be clear you want this job. So that means you're going to put up with things sometimes. And maybe a bit of stress is okay. We're big people. We can handle it. What are you going to say when a person's all stressed? Stop being stressed. You're making me stressed. That's the end of it. I mean, you're going to collapse everything. We've got to learn to grow up a bit. But you've got to, once you know you want this job, it's like being in a ridiculous relationship. If you say, yes, I know this benefit. I want to be with this man, so I'm going to be prepared to work with him. Then you will see everything differently and you'll put up with a bit of shit. It won't matter. It's all part of it. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think? And if she shouts at other people, let them handle it. It's not your job. That's attachment. Oh, she's being mean to other people, poor people. They're grown-ups as well.
So there is no way to show for them to grow, for example?
No way to show them what?
Oh, well, no, maybe not with the boss, but in general, if somebody's being toxic. Is there a way
Darling, I
for
just
them-
answered you. You've asked me the same question. I've been shouting for 10 minutes. And now you ask me the same question.
But how to encourage them to grow? Maybe not
How to what?
encourage someone to grow, or maybe
To who?
um,
Encouraging a person to do what?
or even a coworker, not your boss, for example, to do spiritual growth or
Jesus, God almighty, girl, mind your own business. Stop being such a little policeman. It's not your business to make people spiritually grow. Your job is to do your job, learn your job, be happy to learn it, and be a nice person as well as you can. Come on, please, and be a good example. That's how. You be a good example, not give lectures to people. That's too much. Are we communicating now? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. These simple questions come out much more complicated when you analyze it, isn't it? And we're all the same in the end, you know, isn't it? One step at a time, people, okay? Knowing it is possible to know our mind. That for me, that's what I find encouraging, I have to say. I would suggest, I find, the Buddhist view, because it's so articulate, it's so extensive. The literature is unbelievable about the mind, going right back to these Indians. When you know there's this massive history and massive literature, it's encouraging, because that means there's a system. It's not just a hippie trippy thing made up by somebody last week, you know, because they had a vision under a tree. They made up another version of psychology. This is kind of stable, been around for a while, okay? So that gives us courage, I think. And then it's occasionally really incredible just to hear, for example, Lama Yeshe, he always liked to encourage us, poor, pathetic, self-pity Westerners, you know, to realize we've got the mind. The Buddhist perspective is the mind has unbelievable potential. What that means is to be less neurotic, more brave, more clear, and literally more joyful. I mean, literally more happy. To hear that is incredible, because we are so convinced that happiness comes from the cake and the boyfriend and the job. But no, happiness comes from the mind. Literally, a happy mind has to be cultivated, starting with not doing the negative and then proactively doing the positive. It is a job to be done. We are its work in progress. And the mind we have this phenomenal potential. Then I think it gives us courage. Like if you're in grade 1 of tennis and you have Mr. Federer teaching you every day, you're prepared to work for 20 years because you want to be like him. And that's why it's so important to have examples. That's why it's so important to see real living examples of the efficacy of this approach, you know. It gives you courage to persevere. And we are a work in progress, and it's one step at a time. It's not just hit and miss, you know. I find that helpful with this perspective, the Buddhist view. So, you know, we take from it what you might not like the Buddhist view. It's up to you. You can be a 1% Buddhist. It's perfectly fine. But have this courage, I think, to know that we can know our own mind tremendously well, and it's not set in stone, and we can change. That's, for me, the big thing. Okay, people? So may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Changchob semcho grimpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke panyam pa me payang gong ne gong du pavasho ke wadi nyudo dag lama sange drubgyone drowa chikyang malupa de sala gopasho. Okay.